The ice water seeped through the worn leather of her boots, a familiar gnawing ache that had become a constant companion. Ilara gritted her teeth, forcing her numb fingers to continue scrubbing the flagstones. Each circular motion sent a fresh wave of cold up her arms, a misery that settled deep in her bones. She was nothing, less than nothing, an omega ghost haunting the edges of the Blackwood pack. They called her Scraps, a name spat like a curse, a reminder of her place. She ate what was left, wore what was discarded, and slept where the drafts were coldest. She was an orphan, a stain left behind by parents who had dared to challenge the old alpha, a mistake the pack had been forced to tolerate. A sharp kick connected with her ribs. Ilara gasped, curling into herself as pain exploded in her side. She did not need to look up to know who it was. Lyra's scent, a cloying mix of winter roses and smug satisfaction, filled the air.
"Still scrubbing, Scraps?"
Lyra's voice was like honey laced with poison. "You missed a spot. Right there." The pointed toe of her fur-lined boot nudged Ilara's head. Ilara squeezed her eyes shut, the rough stone pressing into her cheek. Humiliation burned hotter than any fire. She could feel the stares of the other pack members in the great hall, a mixture of pity and contempt. No one would help her. They never did. "Get up," Lyra commanded, her tone bored. "Father wants the east gate cleared of snow. Now." Ilara pushed herself up, her body a symphony of aches. The cold outside would be worse, a brutal, slicing wind that promised frostbite. But it was better than being here, under Lyra's cruel gaze. She kept her head down, a shroud of invisibility her only defense. Worthless. The word echoed in the hollow spaces of her heart. But as she pushed the heavy oak door open and the blizzard screamed in her face, a tiny, stubborn spark refused to be extinguished. She would not break. They could starve her, beat her, name her Scraps, but they could not break the core of her. It was a silent, desperate promise she made to herself every single day. The wind was a physical thing, a monster with claws of ice that tore at her thin cloak. Snow blinded her, a swirling vortex of white that erased the world. The path to the east gate was a treacherous memory, one she had to navigate by sheer will. Every step was a battle against the storm's fury. She had been born in this valley, yet the wilderness felt alien and hostile, an extension of the pack that rejected her. The scent of pine was sharp and clean, a stark contrast to the stuffy, crowded great hall. Here, at least, the air did not judge her. It only tried to kill her. Her task was pointless. No one could clear a gate in a blizzard like this. It was a punishment, a way for Lyra's father, the beta of the pack, to remind her of her place. To remind her she was expendable. The thought sent a fresh wave of cold through her, one that had nothing to do with the temperature. She stumbled, her frozen boot catching on a hidden root. The world tilted violently. For a moment she was suspended in a flurry of white, and then she was falling. The ground gave way to nothing, a sudden, stomach-lurching drop. She cried out, a sound swallowed by the howling wind. Her body slammed against a steep, snow-covered incline. She tumbled, a helpless rag doll of limbs and pain, until she came to a jarring halt at the bottom of the ravine. Everything hurt. A sharp, searing agony radiated from her ankle. When she tried to move it, a cry of pure pain escaped her lips. Broken. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of her agony. She was trapped. No one would come looking for her. They would assume the storm had claimed her and think nothing more of it. She would freeze to death in this lonely ditch, another forgotten scrap. Despair was a heavy blanket, threatening to smother the last of her fight. It would be so easy to just close her eyes, to let the snow cover her, to finally stop feeling the cold, the hunger, the pain, to just stop. But then she smelled it, faint underneath the clean scent of snow and pine. Blood. And something else, something wild and ancient and powerful. It was the scent of ozone after a lightning strike, of deep earth and winter storms. It tugged at something primal within her. Driven by a curiosity that defied her situation, she dragged herself forward, ignoring the fire in her ankle. The scent grew stronger. Through the swirling snow, she saw a shape, a dark mass against the white. It was huge. A fallen tree? No, it was a wolf. But no wolf she had ever seen was this large. It was the size of a pony, its fur the color of midnight. Steam rose from its massive form, melting the snow around it. A long, ugly gash ran along its flank, the source of the blood she had smelled. Its breathing was shallow, ragged. It was dying. Fear warred with a strange, inexplicable pull. This was a predator, a creature of immense power even in its weakened state. Her instincts screamed at her to stay away, but her heart, the foolish, stubborn heart that refused to break, ached with a sudden, overwhelming empathy. It was alone, just like her. She crawled closer, her movements slow, telegraphing her non-threatening intent. The wolf's head lifted, a motion of immense effort, and then its eyes met hers. They were not the eyes of an animal. They were intelligent, ancient, and filled with a pain that mirrored her own. And they glowed. A faint, soft light, like embers dying in a hearth. He was a shifter. Not from her pack. She would have known a presence this potent. A rogue, then. A dangerous one. She should have been terrified, but looking into those fading, luminous eyes, all she felt was a profound sadness. The cold was relentless, stealing the last of her strength. Her vision began to tunnel. She knew she was dying too. They were two lost souls freezing together at the bottom of a ravine. A strange sense of peace settled over her. At least she would not die alone. With her last ounce of strength, she reached out. Her fingers, blue and stiff with cold, brushed against the thick fur of his neck. It was a gesture of comfort, an apology. For his pain, for her own, for a world that could be so cruel. The moment her skin touched his, the world exploded. It was not a sound, but a feeling, a cataclysmic surge of energy that arced between them. A bolt of pure, white-hot lightning shot up her arm, searing a path straight to her heart. She screamed, a raw, soundless cry of agony and astonishment. A mark bloomed on the inside of her wrist, where her pulse thrummed weakly. It burned itself into her skin, a swirling, intricate pattern like a silver flame entwined with a winter wolf. The pain was excruciating, a brand of starlight and ice. It felt like her very soul was being rewritten. Through the haze of agony, she saw his eyes. The dim embers flared into roaring infernos of molten gold. The light was blinding, a sunrise in the heart of the blizzard. The shallow breaths deepened, drawing in air with a sudden, desperate strength. The ragged wound on his flank began to steam, the edges knitting themselves together with impossible speed. He surged to his feet, no longer a dying wolf but a titan of power. The snow around him vaporized in a cloud of steam. The shift was instantaneous, a blur of motion too fast for the human eye to follow. One moment, the colossal wolf stood before her. The next, it was a man. He was immense, taller and broader than any man she had ever seen. His bare skin steamed in the freezing air, corded with muscle and etched with old silvery scars. A wild mane of black hair, dusted with snow, framed a face that was harsh, beautiful, and utterly predatory. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They burned with golden fire, fixed on her with an intensity that stripped her bare. He took a step toward her, his movements fluid and certain. She scrambled backward, the pain in her ankle forgotten in a new wave of terror. This was not just a shifter. This was something more, something ancient and terrifying. He knelt before her, his sighs blocking out the storm. He reached out, his large hand impossibly gentle as it cupped her cheek. His touch was a jolt of warmth, a stark contrast to the deathly cold that had claimed her. It sent another shockwave through the new, raw bond between them. His lips parted, but no sound came out. A flicker of deep, ancient frustration crossed his features. Then his gaze softened, and the intensity of his golden eyes conveyed a message clearer than any words. It was a look of recognition, of discovery, of possession. He leaned in close, his breath warm against her ear. She flinched, expecting a blow, a harsh word. Instead, a single, guttural sound rumbled from his chest. It was not a word, but it resonated through the mark on her wrist, through every fiber of her being. It was a sound of absolute ownership, of 1,000 years of searching come to an end. Mine. The single, unspoken word echoed in her soul. She did not hear it with her ears, but with her heart. It was a claim, a promise, and a terrifying, overwhelming truth. Her world, which had been small and gray and cold, had just shattered into a million pieces of impossible, terrifying light. What was happening to her? He scooped her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. The heat of his body was a shock, a furnace against her frozen skin. It chased away the encroaching darkness, the chill of death that had been settling in her bones. She was too weak, too confused to fight. She sagged against his chest, her head resting in the hollow of his shoulder. The scent of him, ozone and winter storm, filled her senses, overwhelming her. He began to walk, his long strides eating up the ground, carrying them out of the ravine as if it were a mere dip in the path. The blizzard, which had been a raging monster, seemed to part for him. The wind lessened its assault. The snow seemed to fall less thickly around them. It was as if the storm itself bowed to his will. Fear was a frantic bird beating its wings against her ribs. Who was this man? This silent king who commanded the weather and whose touch had branded her soul? The mark on her wrist throbbed with a steady, warm pulse, a constant reminder of the impossible thing that had just happened. It was a tether, connecting her to the powerful being who held her. Her mind screamed at her to run, to escape. This was a nightmare. A dangerous, powerful rogue had found her. He had claimed her with some dark magic. But her body, her traitorous body, relaxed into his hold. It craved his warmth, his strength. It felt safe. For the first time in her life, she felt utterly and completely safe. The contradiction was dizzying. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of terror and disbelief, yet a deep, instinctual part of her recognized him. It was a knowledge that went deeper than thought, a cellular certainty that she had just found the other half of her own soul. It made no sense. She was Alara. She was scraps. She was worthless. Things like this did not happen to people like her. He did not take her back to the Blackwood Pack. He moved in the opposite direction, toward the jagged, formidable peaks of the northern mountains, a territory no one dared to enter. It was the domain of legends, of the ghosts of old gods and the ancient Alpha King who was said to rule over 1,000 packs, a king no one had seen in centuries. As he walked, his gaze was fixed forward, but she could feel his attention on her, a constant, warm pressure. He adjusted his hold, pulling her thin cloak more tightly around her. It was a small gesture, but it was more care than anyone had shown her in her entire life. A lump formed in her throat. She fought back the stupid, weak tears. She would not cry in front of him. She must have drifted off, lulled by the rhythmic beat of his heart against her ear and the impossible warmth of his body. When she woke, the blizzard had passed. The world was hushed, draped in a thick blanket of pristine white snow under a sky of bruised purple and emerging stars. They were high in the mountains, in a place that felt closer to the sky than the earth. A fortress loomed before them, carved from the mountain's peak itself. It was not made of stone and wood, but of dark, gleaming rock and what looked like pure, solidified ice. Towers of obsidian pierced the sky, and faint lights glowed from within, warm and golden. It was a place of breathtaking, terrifying beauty. Guards, clad in dark fur and steel, materialized from the shadows as they approached the gate. They were huge, even larger than the men of her pack, their faces grim and hard. They carried massive axes, and their eyes glowed with a faint, silvery light. They saw her in his arms, and their eyes widened. They dropped to one knee, heads bowed in silent reverence. Not to her, to him. The Alpha King. The legends were true. Panic seized her with icy claws. She had been found, claimed, and stolen by the most powerful shifter on the continent, the king of all wolves. Her broken ankle, her miserable life as scraps, it all seemed like a distant, trivial dream. This was a nightmare of an entirely different magnitude. He carried her through the massive gates, into a great hall that dwarfed the one she had spent her life scrubbing. The air was warm, smelling of wood smoke, roasted meat, and pine. A fire roared in a hearth large enough to stand in, but the hall was silent, utterly silent. Dozens of shifters, men and women of immense presence, stopped what they were doing and stared, their eyes all glowing with that same silvery light, fixed on her. They did not bow. They watched, their expressions a mixture of shock, awe, and disbelief. Their gazes flickered from her face to the mark on her wrist, which was now a soft, silver tattoo against her skin. A low murmur, a wave of thought and emotion, passed through the room. She could almost hear it, a psychic hum that vibrated along the bond. The Luna. He found her. Luna? Queen? They were mad, all of them. She was Alara. She was nobody. She began to struggle, a weak, pathetic attempt to free herself. "No," she whispered, the sound hoarse and broken. "Put me down, please." The king, Kalen, his name suddenly bloomed in her mind, a gift from the bond, stopped in the center of the hall. He looked down at her, his golden eyes softening. He did not put her down. Instead, he simply held her tighter, a silent refusal. He shook his head, a small, definite motion. His expression was clear. "You are not going anywhere. You are home." Home? This place of silent giants and impossible magic? Her home was a cold cot in a drafty storeroom. This was a cage, gilded and warm, but a cage nonetheless. A wave of despair washed over her. She had escaped one prison only to be thrown into another. He carried her up a winding staircase and into a vast chamber. A fire was already burning in the hearth, and thick furs were piled on a bed large enough for 5 people. He finally set her down on the edge of the bed, his movements careful, as if she were made of spun glass. He knelt again, his gaze dropping to her swollen, discolored ankle. He reached for it, and she flinched away, a lifetime of expecting pain making her react before she could think. "Don't," she breathed. He paused, his hand hovering in the air. He looked up at her, and the raw emotion in his eyes struck her like a physical blow. It was hurt. Not anger, not frustration, pure, undiluted hurt that she would fear him. It was so potent, so clear, she felt an echo of it in her own chest. He had saved her life, and she was treating him like a monster. Slowly, deliberately, he met her gaze again. His eyes held a plea. "Trust me." Her heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct she had honed for survival screamed at her to be wary, to stay guarded. But the sincerity in his silent gaze was undeniable. It chipped away at the walls she had built around herself. Hesitantly, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. His hands were warm and surprisingly gentle as they enveloped her injured ankle. A soft, golden light began to emanate from his palms. It was not hot, but it was intensely warm, a soothing heat that sank deep into her flesh, chasing away the throbbing ache. She gasped as she felt the bones shift, knitting back together under his magical touch. The pain receded, replaced by a pleasant, tingling warmth. In a matter of moments, it was over. He released her ankle. The swelling was gone. The bruising had vanished. She flexed her foot, twisting the ankle. There was no pain, none at all. It was as if it had never been broken. She stared at him, her mouth agape. He watched her, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching the corner of his lips. It transformed his harsh features, making him look younger, less like a terrifying king and more like a man relieved. The unspoken message was clear: I will never hurt you. A stout, older woman with kind eyes and hair the color of snow entered the room, carrying a tray of food and a basin of warm water. She bowed her head to Kaelin before turning to Alara. Her smile was genuine. I am Griselda, she said, her voice a low, comforting rumble. The Alpha King has asked me to attend you. She did not say it had been an order. She said it as if it were an honor. Kaelin gave Alara one last look, a look that promised he would return, and then he was gone, leaving her alone with the kind-faced woman. Alara stared at the door he had disappeared through, her mind reeling. He had healed her. He had saved her. And he was a king. An Alpha King who could not speak. Griselda helped her wash the grime from her skin and gave her a simple, soft tunic of fine wool to wear. It was warmer and finer than anything Alara had ever owned. The food, roasted chicken, fresh bread, sweet butter, made her stomach ache with a hunger she had long learned to ignore. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, half convinced she would wake up back in the cold scullery. He has waited a long time, Griselda said softly, breaking the silence. She was mending the tear in Alara's old cloak, her stitches neat and efficient. Alara looked up, confused. Waited? For what? For you, Griselda said simply. Our king has been alone for 500 years. The fates promised him a mate, a Luna, to heal the silence. But they made him wait. She looked at Alara, her gaze knowing. The mark on your wrist. It is the glimmering bond, a legend. It means your souls were forged as one from the beginning. 500 years. The number was incomprehensible. It made her feel small and ephemeral. He was ancient, a legend made real. And she was just a girl who had been lucky enough to survive. But I'm no one, she whispered, the old familiar litany of worthlessness rising in her throat. I'm an Omega, an outcast. Griselda put down the cloak and took Alara's hand, her fingers warm and dry. You are his mate. That makes you our queen. Nothing else matters. The words should have been comforting, but they were terrifying. Queen. Luna. She could not be those things. She did not know how. The weight of the expectation was crushing, a mountain far heavier than the one this fortress was carved from. Hope was a dangerous, fragile thing, and she was too afraid to let it in. Days bled into a strange routine. Kaelin was a constant, silent presence. He would sit with her for hours by the fire, simply watching her. He never pushed, never demanded anything. He would bring her things, a rare, beautiful winter flower he had found on a high cliff, a perfectly carved wooden bird, a soft blanket of white fur. Each was an offering, a quiet question. Are you well? Are you warm? Are you happy? She learned to read his eyes, the subtle shifts in their golden light. A flicker of silver meant amusement. A deepening amber hue meant concern. A dark, stormy gold meant anger, though it was never directed at her. She saw at once, when a captain delivered a report of skirmishes on their southern border. The fury in Kaelin's eyes was a terrifying thing to behold, a silent promise of retribution. She started to understand him without the need for words. His slight nod was a command. The gentle pressure of his hand on her shoulder was a comfort. His smile, rare and breathtaking, was like the sun breaking through clouds. She began to feel the bond between them not as a brand, but as a current, a flow of emotion and understanding that was becoming as natural as breathing. She learned he had lost his voice in a great battle a century ago, fighting a dark sorcerer who had tried to poison the land. The sorcerer had aimed a curse at his heart, but Kalen had shielded himself, the magic striking his throat instead, silencing him forever. The pack's healers, even the most powerful, could not undo the dark magic. The silence, Griselda had told her, had been his constant torment, isolating him even among his own people. Until her. Through the bond, he could share his thoughts, his feelings, his very essence. It was not like hearing words, but it was more profound. She felt his loneliness, the crushing weight of centuries of solitude. And she felt the overwhelming, desperate relief he had found in her. But her own demons were not so easily silenced. One afternoon, she caught her reflection in a polished silver mirror. She saw the same pale, thin face, the same frightened eyes. She wore fine clothes and was no longer hungry or cold, but she was still scraps underneath. She did not belong here. This was all a mistake. The thought was so powerful it must have leaked through the bond. Kalen, who had been across the room examining a map, was suddenly before her. He turned her away from the mirror, his hands gentle on her shoulders. He looked down at her, his golden eyes filled with a fierce, protective light. He shook his head, a sharp, angry motion. No. He tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. And he poured his feelings through the bond, a tidal wave of emotion that left her breathless. He did not see a worthless Omega. He saw strength she did not know she possessed. He saw a resilience that had allowed her to survive a lifetime of cruelty. He saw a kindness that had made her reach out to a dying wolf in a storm. He saw his mate, his equal, his queen. Tears, hot and unstoppable, finally fell. They were not tears of sadness or fear, but of overwhelming, terrifying hope. He wiped them away with his thumb, his touch as soft as a whisper. Could it be true? Could she really be what he saw? It was Vorlag who brought the world crashing down. He was a brute from her old pack, a suitor Lyra had once favored, known for his ambition and cruelty. Elara was in the lower courtyard, breathing in the crisp mountain air when she heard the commotion at the gate. She saw him being dragged in by two of Kalen's guards. Vorlag's face was bruised, but his eyes were filled with a triumphant malice. He was a scout for the Blackwood pack, and he must have followed Kalen's trail. His gaze swept the courtyard and landed on her. A slow, ugly smile spread across his face. He saw the fine clothes. He saw the way the guards treated her with deference. And then his eyes locked on the silver mark on her wrist. His smile widened. "Well, well," he sneered, his voice loud and grating in the silent fortress. "Look what the stray cat dragged in. The Alpha King's new pet." Kalen emerged from the keep, his presence a wave of cold fury. He stood at the top of the stairs, his golden eyes blazing. He did not need a voice to command utter terror. Vorlag flinched, but his greed was stronger than his fear. "She's from my pack," Vorlag shouted, gesturing at Elara. "An Omega, worthless. But that mark? I know what that means. You've claimed her. But the bond is new, it's weak." He looked past Kalen, toward the shadows of the southern mountains. "And my new master pays very well for things that belong to the Silent King." Before anyone could react, a cloud of black smoke erupted in the center of the courtyard. Figures emerged from it, cloaked in shadow and ash, their faces obscured by dark masks. The Ember Covenant, Malakor's cultists. Panic erupted. Kalen's warriors moved to form a protective circle, but the Shadow Weavers were fast. They moved through the chaos like wraiths. Two of them seized Elara. A coarse bag was thrown over her head, plunging her into darkness. She screamed, a terrified, choked sound. Cold metal clamped around her wrists. Silver. The connection to Kalen, the warm, steady current of the bond, was instantly severed. The sudden absence was a physical agony, a tearing in her soul. It felt like her heart had been ripped from her chest. A wave of nausea and vertigo washed over her. She heard the battle raging, the clash of steel, the snarls of wolves. But above it all, she felt a silent, psychic scream of pure rage and despair. It was Kaelin. The pain of their bond being broken was his as well. She was being stolen from him, and the agony of it was a tangible thing. Then the world dissolved into a dizzying, nauseating swirl of shadow travel. When it stopped, she was thrown onto a cold stone floor. The bag was ripped from her head. She was in a dark, damp chamber, lit by eerie green torches that cast dancing, monstrous shadows. A figure sat on a throne carved from what looked like obsidian and bone. He was tall and gaunt, with skin as pale as parchment, and eyes that held no light at all, only a consuming darkness. Malachor, the Shadow King. The sorcerer Kaelin had fought a century ago. He had not been defeated. He had been waiting. "The Silent King's lost little songbird," Malachor said, his voice a dry, rasping whisper that scraped against her nerves. "He hid you well, but not well enough." "What do you want?" Ilara's voice trembled, but she forced it to be steady. She would not show him her fear. Malachor smiled, a chilling, humorless expression. "Your mate took something from me. My voice, my power. I have spent a century rebuilding it in the shadows. Now, I will take something from him, the very heart of his kingdom." He gestured vaguely. "You, my dear, are not the prize. You are merely the key." He explained his plan with the detached cruelty of a scholar dissecting an insect. The glimmering bond was not just a connection between two souls, it was a conduit. A powerful Luna could channel her energy through the bond to strengthen the Alpha King, and through him, his entire domain. The land itself was tied to their power. "But you," Malachor rasped, his dark eyes gleaming, "you are different. There is a dormant power in you, something of light and life, untouched, unclaimed. I will use a ritual to corrupt it. I will pour my shadow magic through your bond and into your king. It will poison him from the inside out. It will sever his connection to his people and his lands. His kingdom will crumble, and I will take the throne." The silver manacles on her wrists felt like they were burning her skin. The absence of Kaelin was a gaping, bleeding wound in her soul. She could feel nothing of him. The warmth, the safety, the silent conversations, all gone. She was alone again, truly alone. And it was 1,000 times worse than before, because now she knew what she had lost. Despair, black and absolute, threatened to drown her. Malachor was going to use her to destroy the man who had shown her kindness, who had seen her as more than worthless. He was going to turn their beautiful, miraculous connection into a weapon. The thought was more painful than any physical torment. She was locked in a cold, dark cell. The silence was absolute, broken only by the drip of water somewhere in the darkness. The silver cuffs felt heavier with every passing hour, draining her not just of the bond, but of her own will to live. She curled into a ball on the floor, the cold stone leaching the warmth from her body. She was back where she started, cold, alone, and helpless. No. The thought was a whisper in the void. It was not her own. It was faint, strained, fighting its way across an impossible distance. "Kaelin?" she thought, her own mind a desperate cry. "Hold on." The thought was stronger this time, a thread of pure will. It was laced with pain, with a fury so immense it was a physical force. "I am coming." The connection was tenuous, a spider's thread in a hurricane, but it was there. The silver dampened the bond, but it could not completely destroy it. He was fighting for her. He was coming for her. A tiny, fragile spark of hope ignited in the crushing darkness of her despair. She had to hold on. For him. The guards dragged her back to the throne room. Malachor was waiting, surrounded by his Ember Covenant priests. A cruel altar of black stone dominated the center of the room, carved with sickening runes that seemed to writhe in the torchlight. Time to sing your final song, little bird, Malachor hissed. They forced her onto the altar. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. She could feel them preparing the ritual, the air growing thick and heavy with dark magic. She closed her eyes, focusing on that single, tenuous thread connecting her to Kaelin. Hold on. Suddenly, the fortress shook. A deafening crash echoed from above, the sound of a mountain breaking. Dust and stone rained from the ceiling. A wave of raw, primal power washed through the chamber, a howl of pure rage that needed no sound to be heard. Kaelin had arrived. The main doors of the throne room exploded inward, blasted to splinters by a force of sheer will. He stood there, framed by the dust and chaos, his eyes not gold, but blazing white-hot suns. He was no longer a king. He was a god of vengeance. Behind him, his warriors poured into the room, a tide of silver-eyed fury. The battle began in an instant, a maelstrom of shadow and steel. Elara watched, her heart in her throat, as Kaelin moved through the battle. He was a blur of righteous destruction, tearing through Malachor's forces. But the Shadow King was powerful. He met Kaelin in the center of the room, and their battle was one of light and shadow, of ancient power clashing. Malachor was cunning. He used his dark magic to create illusions, to strike from unexpected angles. Kaelin was stronger, but the century of silent suffering and the fresh, agonizing wound of their broken bond had taken its toll. Elara saw him falter, a flicker of exhaustion in his defense. Malachor saw it too. He conjured a spear of pure shadow, impossibly dark, and hurled it at Kaelin's heart. Time seemed to slow down. Kaelin was off balance, unable to dodge in time. He was going to die. She was going to watch him die. No! The word was not a whisper. It was a roar, a cataclysm of sound and power that tore from her throat. It was the voice of a queen, a goddess, a woman pushed beyond her limits. The world went white. An explosion of pure, untainted light erupted from her, a supernova of life and energy. It was the dormant power Malachor had sensed, but it was not something he could corrupt. It was wild, pure, and utterly her own. The wave of light slammed into the Ember Covenant priests, and they dissolved into ash. It washed over Kaelin's warriors, and their wounds knitted shut, their strength renewed. It struck the silver manacles on her wrists, and they shattered into dust. The bond between her and Kaelin slammed back into place, not as a gentle current, but as a roaring river of power. She felt his shock, his awe, his overwhelming love. And he felt her power, a force of creation to match his own primal strength. The shadow spear, inches from Kaelin's chest, evaporated into nothingness. Elara stood up from the altar, bathed in a soft, silver-gold light. She was no longer pale and frightened. Her eyes glowed with the same inner light, and she felt a power coursing through her veins that she had never imagined. She was not Scraps. She was not a lost little bird. Malachor stared at her, his dark eyes wide with disbelief and fear. "What are you?" he rasped. "I am his," she said, her voice ringing with newfound power. She pointed a hand at Kaelin, a gesture of absolute belonging. "And he is mine." Then she turned her burning gaze on Malachor. "And you are nothing." She raised her hands, and the light gathered, coalescing into a spear of pure, brilliant energy. It was the opposite of his shadow magic. It was creation, life, and dawn. She did not need to throw it. She simply willed it to be, and it crossed the room in an instant, striking the Shadow King square in the chest. He did not scream. He simply unraveled, his form dissolving like smoke in a hurricane, his dark magic consumed and purified by her light. A final, whispered sigh of disbelief, and then he was gone. The eerie green torches flickered and died, and the room was plunged into a momentary darkness, broken only by the soft light that still emanated from Alara and the golden blaze of Kaelin's eyes. The battle was over. The remaining cultists, their master gone, surrendered or fled. Silence descended, thick with awe and exhaustion. Kaelin was across the room in a heartbeat. He did not touch her at first. He simply stood before her, his eyes drinking her in. The awe, the relief, the profound, earth-shattering love in his gaze was a physical thing. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and cupped her cheek. "You are magnificent," the thought came through the bond, so clear and full of emotion it made her knees weak. She leaned into his touch, covering his hand with her own. "I was so scared," she whispered. "I have you," he answered, his thumb stroking her skin. "I will always have you." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she clung to him, burying her face in his chest. His heart was a steady, powerful drum against her ear, the most beautiful sound in the world. He drew back slightly, his gaze dropping to her wrist, where the glimmering bond mark shone with a brilliant silver light. As she watched, a matching mark began to form on his own skin, a swirling brand of golden light that intertwined with hers. The bond was complete, forged in ice and fire, tempered by darkness, and now sealed in light. When they returned to the mountain fortress, the sun was rising, painting the snow-covered peaks in hues of rose and gold. The entire pack was gathered in the great hall, their silver eyes wide with reverence. They were not looking at their king, they were looking at her. Kaelin led her to the center of the hall. He stood beside her, not in front of her, and faced his people. He placed a hand over his heart, then extended it to her, a silent declaration for all to see. "She is my heart. She is your queen." A single wolf, the old captain with the scarred face, dropped to one knee, then another, and another, until the entire hall, hundreds of the most powerful shifters in the world, were kneeling before her. Not out of fear, not out of duty, but out of genuine, heartfelt reverence. They saw what Kaelin saw. Not an Omega, not an outcast. They saw their Luna, their Queen of Light. Ilara looked at the sea of bowed heads, at the silent, powerful king beside her whose love was a tangible presence, and the last of her fear, the last echo of the word worthless, finally dissolved. She was home. She was loved. She was seen. And she was, at last, whole. She met Kaelin's blazing golden eyes, and a smile, bright and full of promise, bloomed on her face. Their life together was just beginning.